Hello friends and welcome back. The primary focus of today is to move to the next planet, which is Mercury. And one thing, just as a matter of housekeeping, if you guys find this video or the content of this video something that is of value to you, I'd be grateful to you if you like, subscribe, and comment. And as always, if you guys are interested in my readings, courses, classes, and archetypal life narrative counseling, you can go to my website at parisayazi.com. All that information will be in the description box below. So let us dive right into chameleon quality of Mercury in a narcissist chart. Mercury in itself is of that air element. So it is one of the most flexible symbols in the chart. It's the most adaptable energy. And Mercury is also considered to be a very neutral planet. It's even sexually neutral. It's neither male or female. It's like a young person who hasn't gone through puberty yet. No breasts, no facial hair. That gender distinction is not there yet. And Mercury does not have a fixed agenda. That's why Mercury is a diplomat and Mercury can be a messenger who's not taking anyone's side. Mercury in general can take the flavor of whatever that is around it. It doesn't have its own specific flavor. That's the function of Mercury. That's actually a good mind. That's when we say someone has an open mind. That's what we're talking about. It's a flexible mind. Someone who has curiosity, which is also Mercury. It's about that. There's that willingness to take in the information, to process it, to think about it, to play with it. And this is the same quality that makes Mercury brilliant. But in the narcissist mind, in the narcissist intellect, it becomes something completely different, as usual. In the last video, I talked extensively about the function of mirroring when the narcissist was an infant and how it needed that. And all of us require mirroring when we are infants, when we are children, because we're getting a feedback from the world, and that affirms how we feel, and it starts to give us a healthy inner structure. So the narcissist hijacks this function, and it becomes a way that the narcissist mirrors others, but not like a healthy, good parent. It's very hard. If you have never interacted with one, all of this stuff sounds so abstract. But if you have, it's clear as daylight. For example, they have this uncanny ability to parrot your language, the cadence, the rhythm, the timing, the tonality, the words that you use. They can mimic it and they can start to sound just like you. They can even adopt your interests, mimic your emotional tone, reflect your beliefs, values, or they'll even embody your sense of style, your posture, and your body language. Like your interest will suddenly become their interest. Remember that confabulation? Like yesterday, that was their life goal. That was their dream. Today, it's something completely different, and it's completely normal to them. And that's because they're in a new context. They're in a new environment, which requires different things to feed this false self, to provide it the supply that it needs. And you know, when you experience this in life, you hear a lot of people say, when I met him or her or they, there was such a great resonance because we were just so alike. So this kind of parroting in our own everyday psychology, it creates a kind of a connection and an affinity to other people in terms of like how we are so alike, two peas in a pod. But with the narcissist, we have to look at the truth behind this mirroring and what it's all about. And there are two primary reasons why the narcissist does this. Like everything else, everything has to be a split, all good, all bad, as I was explaining in the last video. The obvious one that I've been just keep saying, they don't have access to the true self. So they're disconnected from their own authentic emotional states. And in order to have some sort of an internal coherence, the false self will mimic whatever that's around it to create relatability. The narcissist, I mean this in a literal sense, doesn't just make things up, they make themselves up on the fly. They'll remake themselves as is needed. The second point, why they do this, it's because it's strategic. What do I mean by that? This allows them to secure supply. And they do this, what I mean by this is that they're doing this to get validation, admiration, or to have you emotionally invest in them. They need to earn your trust. All of us human beings need to earn other people's trust based on what we do. And mimicry is one of the methods they use to gain other people's trust and to establish connection. And with human beings in general, mimicking and mirroring is one of the fastest ways of doing this. So that Mercury, instead of being some sort of a tool for genuine connection, becomes a social weapon for the narcissist. It's about weaving in larger than life kind of a performance that draws you into themselves, is a way of attracting you to themselves. And on a daily basis, this is just annoying to deal with after when you understand what the trick is all about. We tend to distance ourselves from such people. But if you find yourself in a relationship with one, so it's a long-term thing that's happening, whether if it's in romance or a friendship or a business partnership, you're going to start to feel something very strange, very intrusive, maybe even disturbing to the core of you. You're going to start to feel that some core parts of your identity are being taken or stolen, not shared, not mirrored like the way it initially might be. They're just mirroring you, they're parroting you, but they're actually taking something. And the reason for that is the more time that you spend with them, the more they become you. They become more and more like you. And they don't do this because they admire you. It's not a point of flattery at all. It's not out of resonance with you. The reason why this is happening because they have an empty inner core. That false self is an image. It's a mirage of where the true, authentic solar self is supposed to be. That center of being is supposed to be. It's like an empty, vast space. In a lot of ways, that false self is eating you and is digesting you as itself. And it has the room and the space to do it. A lot of us were like, we don't want to become like someone else because it's just not energy efficient. It doesn't resonate. It doesn't feel real. But the narcissist actually has the appetite for it. It has the room for it. It has the emptiness for it to take you in. And they create shared fantasies. This is part of the whole process, which again, we'll talk about in another episode. So they will fuse with you. And the people that they choose are the people who are most affirming to giving them that supply and that validation for the false self. And it's really important to remember this is not intimacy. At the beginning, it might feel like that, but it's not. It's not relational. All of it is very tactical. And that's because their internal self is empty and it's unstable. So Mercury is employed here or deployed to borrow an identity, to just hold on to it, because there's an absence of a coherent and a constant one, that center of being. And, they will discard because they need to individuate, but also they might just meet someone else who's just a better fit. That's why I say it's tactical. And, just to give you an example, it's not hard to imagine what this mimicry and identity theft looks like. So let's say you've been dating someone for a few months. At the beginning, suddenly they like hiking, you like biking, they like biking, they figure out what authors you read, and then suddenly they're quoting the same authors. Sometimes when they talk, you're like, oh my God, that's totally what I would say. It's like you read my mind. They even start to dress like you, even if you're a female and they're a male or vice versa. They'll start to adopt your style somehow. So in the meanwhile, they're doing all of this to fill that hole, that empty gap that's within. But as soon as they meet someone else, this is where it gets very, this also comes to the discard phase with narcissists, which is actually very painful. While they took everything from you, they'll find someone else, their identity and their way of living and their style and what they do becomes something significant to them. That looks like a nice fantasy to have. That's a nice identity to embody. And you'll notice they'll start pulling back from you. Suddenly they're distant. They're not accessible anymore. And then you turn to them and you're like, well, what happened? Because you're starting to feel that hole. When they take, that's what I mean. They're so intrusive in that way. They took something. They'll do that. That's the kind of, what I was saying in the first video, they can leave a deep imprint. This is what I'm talking about. So you'll say to them, what happened? Why all this distance? What's going on? And they actually don't have a very good reason. It's like, yeah, I don't know why I used to want to do all those things, become that person. None of those things matter to me. I just completely want to do this other thing. And unless if you find out who they've been with, who they've been hanging around with, this remains a mystery. But once when you figure out where the new source of supply is, you'll see that they're becoming a carbon copy of that, and you no longer fit in that fantasy. So it's about instrumentalizing people too. What's happening here is that the old identity is being collapsed and discarded. That mirror cracks. And this is very important for people who have experienced narcissistic abuse to understand this process, and that emptiness that they suddenly begin to feel A lot of it is coming from this place. It's about identity distortion because it was taken from you, it was stolen, it lost its meaning, it was being iterated by someone who doesn't understand it from a core. So it was devalued all along. Things to keep in mind, and these are all coming from Mercury's function of that mimicry ability that it has. Narcissists will take that and will become a chameleon. So a healthy Mercury is about adaptation, expression, sharing meaning, sharing things in general. That's why it signifies friendship. So the narcissist just needs to latch onto whatever to echo it, just to feed the false self, to have a sense of self. And when it's time, it will discard it and it will leave it. You know, and at the beginning, all of it feels so personal, like we're so alike. There's such high resonance. But after a while, you just feel like there's chunks of you being eaten up and swallowed up, and you're actually losing yourself and you're getting erased. And there's other things. We'll talk about this with Mars. Like they will go into a high defense mode too if you were to bring such things up, and that just turns into another thing. Again, why it's a complex personality disorder. But let's move forward to the speech acts of the narcissist. After all, Mercury represents communication and talking. So we're going to talk about how the narcissist speaks. This is very important. And I'm not talking about the narcissist talking or communicating. What you can call it is that narcissists have speech acts. And narcissists, that false self, is again employing Mercury into doing something that is actually not Mercury's function. It's dysfunction of Mercury. Like in a healthy dynamic, Mercury is about mutual exchange. It's a two-way channel. It's input and output. It's about listening and speaking. Mercury wants conversations, not a monologue. So this is why Mercury's role is to build connections, because of this two-way road. It's about establishing shared meaning. It's about making something comprehensible, something that we can understand between two minds. But in the narcissist mind, dysfunction becomes super warped. In the narcissist, instead of facilitating connection through speaking, it becomes a tool of performance. Speech in itself, Mercury in itself, the intellect becomes a mouthpiece for the false self. And because of this, the entire point of what speaking is shifts with the narcissist. For the narcissist, speaking and talking is not about interacting, it's about entrancing. And if you interacted with one, you know what I'm talking about. You're never having a dialogue with a narcissist. You're always being spoken at. They talk at you, but they don't speak with you. A lot of them will not even make eye contact with you. For example, psychopaths will make eye contact, or if they're not, they'll look at you for punctuation. Narcissists are not even talking to you. You don't even know what they're talking at. And if they're talking to you, they're talking at you. And you know, you notice this because when you leave the conversation, you feel drained. You're confused, or you're just unsure what just happened, or what did you talk about? What was that conversation about? And that's because for the narcissist, the conversation was never meant to include you. It was meant to dominate you. I was saying in the last episode, they are control freaks. They need to dominate at all times. That solar self that has become hollowed, now in its place of it, there's a false self. It needs to affirm itself. And one of the ways to do this is to constantly have control, and it can become very tyrannical. And its speech takes on this flavor too, or speaking. Their speech in general just has a one-directional flow. It's all about persuasion. It has nothing to do with partnership, reciprocity, equality, and they need to have control over communication. For example, they'll give you long-winded monologues, long-winded stories. Like mid-conversation, they'll shift topics on you. They'll give you these disconnected tangents suddenly, or they'll give you these stories that have nothing to do with what you're talking about. Like sometimes even mid-conversation, they'll change topic on you, or they change the conversation. Like you could be talking to someone else too. Suddenly they're standing there, they'll introduce a whole new conversation, even though they knew that's not where it was going. They completely derailed the discussion. They're also very good at suddenly throwing metaphors, which completely distorts things, or they start to use their pseudo wisdom that sounds deep in the moment, but if you try to scrutinize it, the whole thing just falls apart. It just sounds good to them. That's why they're doing it. They're trying to have control. That's why they're doing it. And this, I call this like the narcissist's verbal overwhelm. It's very common with them. It's a prominent feature of the narcissist, the way that they speak. Look at the political arena and some prominent figures that have a very overwhelming speech. And you know what? Up to this point, I've made a number of points saying that it's unconscious. That's the structure of the narcissist, therefore, they'll do such things. But with this one, there's a lot of intent behind it. They need to create confusion. And in that confusion, that's how they maintain control. And sometimes they'll do this in a very passive way. So you're talking about something very important. Let's say there are 3 friends. You're pouring your heart out to one friend. And of course, a narcissist is not being fully engaged because you're in this moment, that's how the conversation's going. You and the other friend are having this intimate moment. They'll actually pretend that they're falling asleep or they're completely disinterested or just pick up their phone. They'll check out. And that's because in that moment, it's so overt what they're doing that you're forced to cut your conversation, look at the person and be like, are you okay? Do you need anything? Do you need some coffee? Even that little divergence from what's happening, it affirms them. And this kinds of things are actually very intentional with them because they explicitly feel it. And we got to make this very clear. Mercury is always, the sweetie pie is always trying to create clarity. But with a narcissist, their intent is to create fog, distortion. And as I was saying, something at the beginning, which is very important, is that they use speech to entrance. And what I mean with that is that when the narcissist speaks to you, their goal is not even for you to understand them. And they're definitely not trying to understand you. Their goal is to get you to agree with them, to admire them, to submit to them, and to be very impressed. So that's why they give speeches all the time. You're just having a casual conversation, and then they're trying to drop wisdom on you while you're talking about underwear. It's like, oh my God. What they need is to direct all attention towards the false self. They have to reinforce the image of the false self and the way that they need to be seen. And you know what? Even when they're being vulnerable or it comes across that way, if you pay attention, even that vulnerability is a performance. That in itself, whether if it's body language or speech, is another way of the act of persuasion by trying to evoke, let's say, empathy, admiration, whatever it is. They need this false self confirmed and affirmed at all times. It will pop up in a lot of strange ways. And there's a subtext to the things that they say, whether if they are the absolute victim or the absolute wise person who can fix everything and who knows everything. The subtext is always something that's affirming them. It's actually not about the conversation. It's not about the topic, and it's certainly not about you. There's always some sort of an aggrandizement in their speech acts. And when they get very good at it, with age, narcissists get better at being narcissists. They'll take this self-aggrandizing thing and somehow they bring a flare of humility, and then they want confirmation of how great they are because of their humility. It's just draining mentally to be around this and to use your Mercury to try to decode what's happening. So we can see that natural balance that Mercury has, the organization that it tries to create, the symmetry, everything just becomes asymmetrical with a narcissist. Like, they'll speak super loud too. So they'll just flood the space with the sound of their voice, how much they talk, and how much space they actually take, whether if it's physically or through their voice. And it's definitely not a back and forth. It's just literally them flooding the whole place. They have no interest in you, what you have to say. They're not looking for a feedback loop. The entire architect of language becomes very distorted. Like, Mercury wants dialogue and mutuality. It thrives in environments where it can be curious, adaptable, understanding. But in the narcissist, Mercury is hijacked to just have a utilitarian function or a cause, which again goes back to the protection and feeding of the false self. And you know, the effect of this distorted Mercury is very noticeable. When you talk to a narcissist, you feel like you're in a maze. You're just getting lost. You're drowning. You're going deaf. Like, let's say you've been in a relationship with one, you divorced them after a marriage, or the relationship broke and you want to talk to them afterwards. for some sort of a resolution and clarity, which is what Mercury wants, some kind of an understanding, and you come out more confused, more distorted, and somehow feeling smaller. That's what they do. Mercury's energy is completely weaponized by the narcissist. And in essence, when we look at the narcissist and what it's doing with this Mercury function, it's not just about someone who talks too much, talks too loud, dominates conversation. We're watching a fundamental corruption of language in itself. The narcissist corrupts language and co-opts language. Words are no longer a bridge between people. They actually become barricades or weapons. They can even become tools of evasion for the narcissist. They're weapons of persuasion, and they are the destroyers of all kinds of intimacy. And Mercury, our lovely Mercury, the god of exchange, commerce, messages, and understanding through the mind of the narcissist is silenced. Imagine Mercury silent. Mercury as a one-way channel of action or how it proceeds. Mercury, in the case of the narcissist, is not about connecting minds. It's about creating and protecting illusions that are coming from the false self. I'm going to get a little bit of water and I will come back. We're going to talk about how Mercury comes to function as over-intellectualization with the narcissist. And this requires some explaining. I'll be right back. Like the bamboozlement of the speech act was not enough. Now we're going to get into over-intellectualization. But before getting into this one, there's something important to remember about classification or categories of narcissists, because narcissism is not a one-size-fits-all. There are subtypes of narcissists. For example, two of the subtypes, they can be somatic or cerebral. So they're called somatic narcissists or cerebral narcissists. But both of them we can use the word over-intellectualization for lack of a better word. I mean, with the cerebral narcissist is pretty straightforward. They value their own intellect. That's part of the false self, is that I'm intelligent, I'm a genius. So everything's being filtered through that. But the somatic narcissist, you would think like it's so body-oriented, it's somatic. How is it going to over-intellectualize? They'll do it too. Because, yeah, the somatic narcissist is hyper focused on its physical appearance, for instance. He's a gym bro. She's a gym bra. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. What's important to them is their sexuality and their desirability. And they will over-intellectualize this component too. And quite frankly, they're a little bit more uncouth than the cerebral narcissists, because they actually try to talk knowledge, something that they know, to show how smart they are, how brilliant they are. And that's the way they're getting their supply and their admiration. But the somatic narcissists can take the absurdity to a whole new level, because they're not at the gym all the time, but they're still somatic narcissists. So they're relying on the physicality of things to get the admiration. So they still have to speak. They still have to interact with you outside the context of such things. For example, we can see this online with certain figures too. And this is actually very common with male narcissists who are somatic narcissists. They'll have these elaborate theories of gender, sex, sexuality, and all of it is to justify their own behavior when you pay attention to what these theories are about and what narcissism as a disorder is about. That's why I'm saying narcissism seeps to every facet of life. So it's not a trait. It's something that is functional and operational at all times. And it just comes out in different ways all the time. So let's say a male somatic narcissist might construct this kind of a theory. It's totally natural for men to sleep around with women. It's just biology. That's how it goes. That's how God created us. And then in that same breath, they'll turn around and judge a woman very harshly for having, let's say, more than one partner. He's going to claim that she's somehow tainted or less valuable. What's happening here clearly is not based on reason or insight. There's something deeper here. This is Mercury being used to rationalize a very deep insecurity. And Mercury here is employed as a form of rationalization to employ control. If you think about it, this kind of Over-intellectualization is not brilliant and it's not genius. It's just distortion dressing itself up as logic, and the speech act is used, that power of persuasion, the thing of talking at you and preaching to get their point across, to convince you that this is the truth. At the core of this behavior is the narcissist's need to be perfect and to be something like godlike, and needs to feel special and powerful. So when the narcissist is with someone that they perceive, because it's part of their fantasy, might not even be true, but that's just a fantasy they made up on the fly, that this person's pure and this person's untouched, it gives them a sense of elevated worth. But if that same person that they're idealizing and they're building that fantasy around, if at some point that person shows a little bit of autonomy, at some point they show that they have some sort of a history, not even in relationships, any kind of history, that isn't centered around the narcissist will experience them as a threat. It's an injury to their fragile self-worth. And that insecurity runs very deep in the narcissist. So these kind of theories that they built is about confirming their own greatness. It has nothing to do with reality again. And you know what, to be clear right at the get-go here, when I say over-intellectualization, I'm not talking about intelligent or thoughtful analysis with the narcissist. In the example that I just gave too, I'm talking about defense mechanism. And this defense is to actually control and to suppress their own emotional vulnerability and insecurities. And in the last video, I was saying that narcissists lose the ability to authentically feel things because of that sun and moon function and those early life experiences. Like, for example, I was explaining how they struggle to have empathy because they never received that themselves. So instead of feeling emotions and their own internal landscape and to have a good inner sense of self, they're forced to analyze them because they can't feel it. And whatever they're feeling is coming from the false self. Again, it's not them. There's a distance, there's a gap. So they have to intellectualize things. That's what I mean about intellectualizing and over-intellectualizing. They're always standing outside of their feelings. So they're standing outside and they're like, that's what that phenomena is. What's the name of that? How do I describe that? Or how do I perform it? Rather than actually letting those emotions or internal senses move through them. It can't, because the false self, the mask is there. The internal self, as I was explaining in the last video, has been atrophied. And this over-intellectualization, you'll see it in the way that they try to express themselves. It almost feels like they have this long-winded monologue about how they feel or how you should feel. It's like the word happy or the word sad is not enough because they're not feeling it. They have to just grind at it to try to evoke it in you because they don't understand what that feeling is like. Their descriptions don't have an emotional depth. The only emotion that you're picking up is from their grand performance in the moment. But if you were to take their performance out and just listening to them without their presence, it doesn't have an impact. This is another reason why narcissists feel that they have to be the face of everything. They know on the depth of themselves, they know that they don't have an impact without their performance. So this is what I mean about over-intellectualization. It's not about depth of thought. It's about disconnection from the heart, that moon concept I was talking about in the last video. The sun concept, which is the core and the center of our being. Like, they can't access true emotional depth. They can't be present with emotions. So they compensate with overthinking and over-talking, over-description. So Mercury here is functioning overtime to fill the void, a void that's left by the absence of the authentic self, the void that is the false self. It needs to talk itself, overthink, over-intellectualize itself into existence, and to give itself a sense of significance. The next point that I want to bring up is Mercury as a psychopath.